So last week we got into all of the pre-RPA stuff, all the forms that come before the RPA, and now we're into the actual RPA. I do believe we covered agency last week, and now it's kind of like the real juicy part, the grid. So one of the best things about this new contract that we received last year was the fact that they put everything, all the terms in one spot on the contract. So the first 3 pages are what we call the grid, and it's everything that we need to know. Now, we do need the rest of the contract because it explains the interworkings of the grid, but the basic information is all in the grid. So let's jump into it. All right. The first thing that we're going to see is number 3. Is going to start off with how much, right? That's the thing that we mostly care about when we're looking at an offer is what are you offering? What is the purchase price? And our purchase price will go right here on the line. And if it is an all cash offer, and we are super excited about all cash because that means it's not subject to these crazy rates, then we would click the button all cash here. Close of escrow. How long is it going to take you people to get this thing done, right? So those details will also go on here. The flip from the contract from last time and this time is that it defaults to days after acceptance. So we never know how long it's going to take to negotiate, especially in the current market that we're dealing with today. Buyers are coming in low, sellers are trying to say, okay, I'll do some of what you're asking, but not all of what you're asking. And so sometimes it takes a few days to land on an exact price and terms. And so that could then push out the days that it takes for us to close. So it's always best, I always like to go days after acceptance. So after everything is said and done, buyers and sellers have signed counteroffers and everything included, that's when the calendar starts. So the day everybody signs is day 0. We'll revisit that again, but planting that seed for you. The day it all happens and is done is day 0. And then you're going to start with days after for your days after acceptance. We used to say 30 days was the standard kind of contract, how long it takes for a contract. If you're brand new, I'd start at 30 days. But really, when there's financing involved, the lender is usually going to be the one to give us the best indication of how long it's going to take. They're the ones that kind of make or break our deals when there's financing involved. Other factors that it can affect closing would be, hey, for some reason, people love to go on vacation when they're trying to buy a house. So that's something that you're going to want to talk to your clients about, like what's convenient for them to close escrow. I see Melanie right there, and she knows all about people going on vacation towards the end of of a contract. I know it's happened to Jan and Danielle, and of course, many of you. So we want to just kind of figure out when it makes sense to close. We want to navigate around any holidays. If you know that you're getting into contract on a property that's going to need a lot of work and you want that work to be completed, you'll want to factor in all of those kinds of things. But standard, everything's going well, the market is normal. 30 days is about the time frame that we use for closing, and we kind of see that as acceptable. Anything longer than 30 days, people go, I don't know. Anything shorter than 30 days usually creates a little bit of excitement, makes your offer a little bit more interesting if you can close in, let's say, 21 days. But again, you're going to want to triple check that with the lender. On an all cash deal, I still recommend you give it at least 10 to 14 days to close on an all cash deal. Even though there's no lender involved in the transaction, there's still a lot of moving parts. There's still paperwork that has to get shuffled around. Escrow has to get everything in order, and it's going to take at least, I would say, the soonest I've ever seen a real cash offer goes through is 7 days, but that's making it real difficult on everybody. I would still try to shoot, as I said, between 10 and 14 days on a cash deal. Your expiration of offer is basically, hey, how long am I going to let this thing float out? How long does the seller have to decide whether or not they're going to accept or counter my offer? It's just letting them know that I'm not going to wait around forever. The buyer technically is making the offer in good faith. And so therefore, they are not making an offer on another property. So that expiration allows the buyer to be able to move forward and make another offer if they choose. It doesn't mean that if the seller decides to accept the offer on, let's say, day 4 or day 5, and the buyer hasn't entered into contract on anything else, that you can't have an agreement. You can absolutely have an agreement. If the seller signs and the buyer's okay with it, then we can enter in after the expiration of offer. But the expiration allows that buyer to have some flexibility and be able to move forward on another purchase if they so choose. I hear you guys asking, what if they do want to make offers on more than one house at the same time? Well, as I said before, each and every offer needs to be an offer in good faith, meaning that if they're making multiple offers, they have the ability to then um, move forward on all of their offers. Some of our clients will try to play a game and they will say, I'm going to make an offer on this property and this one at the same time. When the market was really crazy, we saw a lot of that. They couldn't be stopped. And what would have to happen is if you had an offer out on one property and you put an offer out on another one, the soonest you got one accepted, you would have to withdraw the other before that seller accepted the offer. And if you are ever going to do a withdrawal of the offer or a withdrawal of a counter offer, there is a form for that. It's called the whoa, I need to stop, or the WOO. I told my family I'm not funny. I keep trying to make jokes all the time. I just try to keep you guys awake. But that form, whenever you're going to withdraw an offer, is called the WOO, or you can just remember me going, whoa, I need to put the brakes on. All right, back to this. So the all cash offer, this is the language. I am going to bounce back and forth in this presentation. I should have explained when we're looking at our grid, we've got all these different columns here. Let me just back up one. So down here is the item number that we're discussing. So if you want to know, okay, where is the purchase price in the offer? It's number 3A. Close of escrow is going to be your 3B. Here, where it says the paragraph number in this column is going to be where in the actual explanations and definitions in the RPA, it speaks to this part of the grid. So it's really cool. You're like, okay, I want to know more about expiration of offer. What are the details? What are they talking about? Well, I would just flip to number 32A, and that would tell me all about expiration of offer. Terms and conditions of this is going to be here, and then any additional terms were here. And so we saw how that worked with the purchase price. Here are the terms and condition, and here would be the additional terms. All right, so purchase price, whenever you're dealing with all cash, you have to make sure that it is not contingent on the buyer obtaining a loan. That's why we say all cash, right? And then we talked about the expiration of offer. One of the things I did want to point out here is that the seller has no obligation to respond to any offer made. So that's why we have that clock, because you can submit your offer to the seller and they can just turn up their nose and not even respond. Nowadays in this market, that is rarely going to happen because these sellers are extremely desperate most of the time to get their property sold. But there are those really smart sellers that are pricing their property well, presenting it well, and they are going to be in multiple offer situations. They do not have to necessarily get back to you and give you anything on the status of your offer. We always recommend, as real estate professionals, call each and every agent that writes an offer on your property. Give them the courtesy, take the time, build the relationship. It will pay off in the end. One day you'll be writing an offer on one of their properties, and they will appreciate the fact that you took the time to give them a call. Professional courtesy is really big in our industry. And even though maybe in the past couple of years we got away with some renegade crazy stuff, that time is over. And now it's time to really be a real estate community and support each other. This is why you may not choose to tune into my class, because you're going to get so much more than you asked for. All right. Next up, we're talking about the initial deposit. Now, it's really important that we speak to initial deposit. It's no longer called good faith deposit. Even though I see that everywhere, it's no longer called earnest money deposit, right? So a lot of times we speak in shorthand and we say EMD, but they really changed the language to call it the initial deposit. So initial deposit, what should that be? I like the 2% rule. I always go with the 2% rule. I feel like 1% is not enough, but 2% is a strong showing. And 3% is kind of your max. So we'll get into that and talk a little bit about 3% and why that's the max. But I feel like anywhere between 2 and 3% is a strong showing from the buyer. The contract is cool now. When you put in the number, it will figure out what the percentage is of the purchase price. However, it doesn't work backwards. You can't put in 2% and then come up with 20,000. It only works the math in this direction. It does default that within 3 business days. Now, this is the only reference to business days in the purchase agreement for the deposit. They have 3 business days to get that deposit into escrow. And it does default to wire transfer. If they want to get that to escrow in a different way, if they want to drop it off or whatever they want to do, like a personal check or cashier's check, you would want to check that box and then put that information in there. One way that it's not going to get to escrow is through us. We don't touch the check, right? Just to remind everyone, that rule has been in place for a very long time. The client takes the money direct from their pocket to escrow. We don't get in the middle of that. We also don't take any money for inspectors or anything else. Like when it comes to the client and their money, we always want them to go direct to the source, right? So we don't get into it. If they can't make it to the home inspection and they need us to run a check to the home inspector, no, the answer is no. Everybody has payment methods these days. Good old Venmo, good old PayPal, right? Whoever it is, Venmo, PayPal, it's not you. So please be extra special careful and don't ever be the deliverer of checks or money direct to the client. Increased deposits. Sometimes we write up really interesting situations where we say the client is going to increase their deposit after a certain thing happens. I don't see that too much, so I'm not going to spend too much of your time going into that, right? So the initial deposit is anything that's acceptable to the escrow holder, and it does say it's going to be delivered by wire transfer unless we put something else in there. I want to bring your attention to this retention of deposit. This used to be like section 21 of the old contract, and now they put it in the place where it makes the most sense, right? They put it right next to the deposit language, which is where it goes. And paragraph 29, if initial, that's the paragraph that speaks to the deposit and whether or not the deposit is going to be the remedy if the deal falls apart. So if initial, all parties agree that the remedy for the buyer's default, so let's say the buyer cancels after they've removed contingency, is going to be limited to the deposit. Now, why is that good? Your clients, because that's one of those things that they'll have to initial yes or no. Why is that good? It's good for the buyer because the buyer knows this is how much they're risking. They're only risking $20,000. That's how much they'll lose if they remove contingencies and then something happens and they need to walk away. There's not some number out there that they could be sued for. It's good for the seller because the seller doesn't need to show that they've been damaged in any way. If the buyer walks away after removing contingencies, then they know 20,000 is what they get. The buyer needs to have some skin in the game because the seller is basically taking their property off the market and giving the buyer an exclusive opportunity to investigate that property and try to come up with the funds to be able to purchase that property. And during that period of time, once the seller accepts the offer, they cannot take another offer that comes in higher. They cannot tell the buyer, hey, you're going to pay me more money because the market's gone up. They are basically committed to that buyer. And in order for them to take that step to commit to that buyer, the buyer is putting forward their initial deposit, which says, this is how serious I am. And so then the seller feels like, okay, they are very serious and I'm willing to take my house off the market and give this buyer an opportunity to investigate in good faith and come up with the ability to be able to purchase my property. In this market, that's really serious because the way prices are headed, if they take their property off the market for 2 weeks, 30 days, they don't know what the market might look like if that buyer bails and then they have to come back on the market. They could have potentially lost 10, 20, $30,000 in value. So you really want to make sure that you have a well vetted and serious buyer for your seller before your seller takes that property off the market and gives that buyer that exclusive opportunity to investigate and see if they have the ability to be able to purchase that property. All right, loan amounts. So the next section we're digging into is the loan amount. So this is if there's financing and it's not cash. If you would have checked the box all cash, it won't even let you fill in this section about loan amounts. So what we need to tell the seller is if I'm getting a loan to purchase this property, what are the parameters of that loan? How much of the loan, how much of the purchase price am I borrowing and how much am I putting as a down payment? So the first thing you'll put down here is your loan amount. So that's going to be the difference between the purchase price and the down payment. And again, it does the math for you. When you put in the number, it will calculate the percentage of the purchase price. But as far as I know, it doesn't work in the other direction. You will also need to say if you are paying any points to get that rate. And then you're going to need to put in what that rate is. And this has never been more important in this market. Whatever that number is going to be, the percentage not to exceed, let's say they put 7% in there and then rates went up to 7.25%. They no longer have to purchase this property because now they have said they're priced out of their ability to purchase. If you had nothing there and rates went up to 7.25% and you were qualified at 6.9, then you could potentially lose your deposit because you did not put anything in this little box right here that lays out the parameters for how many percentage points you're willing to pay for your loan. This is really, really important, guys. With nothing here, it basically eliminates your ability to use your loan contingency. You've got to say what the max interest rate is for your buyer. You're also going to want to tell the seller if they're dealing with an FHA or VA loan. And if they are dealing with an FHA or VA loan, they're going to need both the FVAC and then I think they need this HID. I don't see that one too often. But the FVHC is the one that is the, oh wow, my brain is blank. But that is the one that tells the client, is that the amendatory clause? That's one of them is the amendatory clause. And the amendatory clause basically says that if the property doesn't appraise for the purchase price, then the buyer has the ability to get out of that without losing their deposit. So no matter what other parameters you write into the contract, what other things you come up with, once you have that amendatory clause, it supersedes everything else. And we'll get back into that a little bit later, but I do like to drop seeds all throughout. Somebody gonna ask a question or just laughing at me because I seem ridiculous? Only my kids are allowed to laugh at me because I seem ridiculous. And sometimes my husband. All right. So if it's a VA or FHA, then sometimes there are requirements for VA and FHA. And if there are lender required repairs, then those have to be disclosed to the seller. The seller should know going in that there are extra parameters for both FHA and VA. And then additional financing terms, we may see more and more seconds coming our way, and that's going to look basically the same way that it did on the first. Yep, this is where I was getting into. So what I have done here, in case you guys haven't picked up, I went into the contract and pulled those sections that are referenced, and it does speak to the FHA, VA amendatory clause, which is the form FVAC, so I wasn't too far off. It also references the CAR form RR, or the request for repairs. So on the request for repairs, there is this place on there that's been added that speaks to FHA and VA required repairs. That's now built into the request for repairs. And it does say right here in the contract that the seller has no obligation to pay or satisfy any lender requirements unless agreed in writing. So just because they are agreeing to an FHA or VA transaction does not mean that they're necessarily agreeing to a clear pest. So keep that in mind. Here's my request for repairs, which shows that section of the form that speaks directly to FHA and VA repairs. Next section of our grid is going to speak to occupancy. So the next thing we want to know is, do they want to occupy the property, or is it going to be a secondary or investment property? And that's important for a couple of reasons. The main reasons it's important is the lender is going to get a copy of the contract, and the buyer's interest rate is going to be affected if it's not going to be their primary residence. And so they have to see that on here. So it defaults to it's going to be their primary residence. Unless it's not, then you would put that it's either going to be secondary or investment.
Just go for it.
The balance of the down payment, CAR form does the math for us. They know that most realtors are math challenged. That's why there's only like 7 math questions on the whole test, and some of us still fail. But the math is done for us on the down payment and the purchase price. So kudos for us. We get to still do business even if we're math challenged. All right. Somebody's got some background noise going. I'm going to give you a minute to ask a question. I'm going to pause between page 1 of the grid and page 2 of the grid for any questions. All right. So this is page 2 of the grid. This is what it looks like. Kind of the same as we've got the columns going. We've got more terms and conditions up here. Now we're going to get into this.
You guys have questions?
Box right here. Got some questions for me, Crystal?
Oh, no, I didn't even know I wasn't on mute. I'm sorry. We have people in the office.
That's cool.
I'm sorry. No questions. We're good. You're doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So let's get into this top section of the grid. Seller's credits, if any, to the buyer. So this is built right into the purchase contract where the credits are. I used to say something like additional financing terms. Now it's laid out pretty clear. The seller credits. So you could either ask for a credit in terms of a dollar amount or in terms of credits in the purchase price. I was always taught that for negotiating, you ask for a dollar amount instead of a purchase price, because in the seller's mind, if you need a dollar amount, then that's more like a need. But if you're asking for a percentage, that's more like a want. So I don't know, psychologically, that's how I was taught. So I always just do the math and ask for a specific number. And then if any of you taken Alex's class and we read the book on Never Split the Difference, he's got some formula for you, like kind of make up the last few numbers and don't use any round numbers. So just some negotiating tips in there. The credit is already specific in here that the seller credit to be applied to the closing cost. So that's fantastic. We don't even have to write that in. But if you want the credit to be treated in some other way, good luck, by the way, most lenders don't like that, then you would check this box and write that in here. We do need to talk about, whenever we're speaking about credits to the buyer, the difference between allowable credit and contractual credit. And the contract is very clear that the allowable credit, whatever the lender says the buyer is allowed to get, the lender allowable credit is the max credits, period. So regardless if you are a great negotiator and you're able to negotiate more in contractual credits, the max a buyer is going to be able to receive is that lender allowable credit, whatever the lender limit is. And the contract is very clear that, let's say you left some money on the table, that money is left on the table. It doesn't mean there's going to be an automatic price reduction, or there is no other remedy for that. So whenever you're going to ask for credits, you want to double, triple check with the lender up front about what that lender allowable credit is, and then make sure you're within that frame. If you're asking for credits up front in the purchase agreement, keep in mind that anything that you want to get later on from request for repairs is also going to have to fall into that credit as well. So if you think that you're going to need to ask later on for some repair credits and you're asking for credits up front, maybe you adjust the purchase price because you don't want to run up against that lender allowable credit. And then let's see, is there anything else I want to say about that before I move forward? I feel like there's something tingling in my spider sense about credit. I said about negotiating, I said about allowable credit, I said that it's a credit to the closing cost. All right, maybe it'll come to me later. Jan. Hi, what were
Yes.
you gonna say?
Hi. Wait, where do I unmute? Uh,
No, we can hear you.
oh, good. Okay. So my question is, in the past, we've always had to do an amendment or addendum if there was a credit towards closing costs from the seller to the buyer. So this takes that out of the equation, correct? This speaks
Right.
that all the lender needs is this.
If you're doing it up front in the initial offer, if you know going in that they're going to do it up front, then you need this. You would not have to follow up with another amendment or addendum because it's in the original purchase agreement.
Great, thank you.
Sometimes it happens later on when we're negotiating, and so then you would need an amendment or an addendum or request for repairs, but this is it for now.
Great, thank you.
Any other additional financing terms, any other thing that you think you want to make up would go on this line. I do caution everyone that if you're ever making up something, coming up with some creative financing or any other creative anything, find yourself typing in, reach out to your branch manager. We have a form book, a legal library, and we have hundreds of years of experience and attorneys that will help you put this together in a way that doesn't kind of undo something else in the contract. So just be careful whenever you find yourself writing on a contract, you're writing your own legal language. Make sure to use those very helpful legal attorneys that we have on staff to get that done for you. That's what we're here for. We love helping you with that kind of stuff. All right. Additional financing terms, verification of down payment, and closing costs. So if you have an all cash offer, you're going to want to know prior to accepting the offer that the person on the purchase agreement has those funds available. So you want to see those funds in their account. So this has defaulted to, it's going to be attached with the offer. The old form used to say within 3 days. And you guys know, if you've ever talked to me, why would I take my offer off the market right now to find out if you have the money 3 days later? You know, wimpy, I'll take a hamburger today and pay you Tuesday. No, that's never going to work, right? So before I take my property off the market, I want to know that you have the funds. So as the listing agent, I'm going to verify that those funds are in an account in your name, not in grandma's name, right? Because the person who's making the offer should be the person who has the cash available. You know, I always tell the cautionary story that, you know, someone's going to lend them the money. They go through the process of looking at property with you. They find out how bad the market is. They finally settle on a house that they love. They get into contract. They go to buy the property. And then they bring in the person who was going to help them buy it. And they have not been through that process with you. And they go, no, 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 this is not what I have in mind. I'm not going to give you the money to buy this house. I had something else in mind for you. So just make sure that if you're working with a buyer, they have those funds available, or if someone's giving them those funds, they've been with you on the whole journey. So when you finally get them to the point of writing an offer, you don't have that backlash. But if you're protecting your seller and you're the listing agent, you definitely want to verify that the funds are available in that person's name. So that is just in the contract. There's nothing to write in. There's nothing to check. It defaults to that. All cash offers, sufficient funds attached to the offer. So you're going to have proof of funds, which is going to be a bank statement or some kind of finance statement that shows they have available funds that they can pull to be able to purchase the property. If there is financing involved, you do still need to verify that they have their closing cost and down payment available today. Same instance in their name, available to them. It is going to be attached. So submit it alongside the offer, an attachment of that bank statement or financial statement That's going to be submitted with the offer. Otherwise, you would never take your property off the market before seeing it. And then the loan application, right? So you're going to want to see a pre-approval letter attached to your offer, again, before you take the property off the market. And then great thing here, is it a pre-qual? Is it a pre-approval, or is it a fully underwritten approval? We really want to see a fully underwritten approval, right? So it's super nice when we can check that box that says fully underwritten approval. Pre-qual means the lender has had a conversation with the client. They've told them, I make about this much. I think my credit is good. I don't have any debt. The lender says, fantastic. You sound great. Can't wait to meet you. Pre-approval means that they've actually seen the documents. The lender's put eyes and hands on the documents and has said, yep, I see your stuff. I agree. You're ready to roll. Fully underwritten means that all those documents have gone into the system. The underwriter has reviewed them. They've looked at the entire picture. They've come back with loan conditions that the buyer is satisfied that they can meet, and the buyer is 100% ready to go, only awaiting appraisal and prelim to get this situation done. So we definitely want to see a fully underwritten pre-approval. All right. Let's get through this. Buyer stated financing. Let me take a drink of water. Buyer stated financing. I think we're going to start seeing more creative things coming, but basically buyer stated financing came out of the whole foreclosure market, when you had all of these cash buyers beating out, regular folks. And so folks started writing offers saying they were cash offers. And then once they got their offer accepted, they started letting people know, oh, shoot, I changed my mind. Now I'm going to get a loan. Buyer stated financing basically says that if the buyer states that they're going with cash, conventional, whatever it is that they put in the RPA about their financing, that the seller has relied on that and they made decisions based on that financing that the buyer stated. The buyer must pursue that line of financing. Now, the buyer can go and also at the same time pursue other types of financing, but in the end, the buyer has to be able to close in the same time frame, and the seller has no obligation to cooperate with the buyer on their efforts to obtain the additional financing terms. So when would that come into play? Let's say, for instance, the buyer said that they were going to be a conventional loan, and it turns out they're actually FHA. Well, FHA comes back and says, hey, seller, now that we're FHA, we need you to do X. The seller can say, you know what, I never agreed to an FHA loan and I'm not doing anything. And that's what buyer stated financing is all about. It's saying, look, buyer, don't play games. You said you were going to do it. This is why we chose you. We expect you to do it. But it does say if the buyer finds a way to get it done within the same parameters, sometimes it's something simple, like they said they were going to put 20% down, and then they found out, you know what, it makes more sense for them to put 10% down. It has absolutely no effect at all. Sometimes they're able to change financing terms in other ways. But again, it should have no impact on the seller, and the seller does not have to cooperate with those changes that the buyer made. Okay, so now we're getting into this section on final verification of condition and assignment requests. These are kind of like two little odd ones. So final verification of condition is also called the final walkthrough. But that one's really important because a lot of things have to happen. A lot of things in the contract are based on the final verification of condition. So when we get into it, you're going to hear a lot of language that goes along the lines, prior to final verification or things like that. So at some point, the buyer has the ability to go in and they're checking to see if any repairs that they were asked to do, anything that the seller was asked to do, that those things are complete and done. They're checking to make sure that the property has been maintained the entire time through the life of the escrow. So, you go see the property, it's beautifully staged, the pool is blue, it's glimmering, the grass is green, and you come back 30 days later, the grass is dead, the pool is green. So the seller does have to maintain the property throughout the escrow in the same condition. And then also it gives the buyer the opportunity to verify that any repairs that the seller agreed to have been done and that the seller has complied with any other seller obligations. And all those things have to happen prior to the final verification of condition. So when we look in here, it defaults to 5 days. So 5 days prior to close of escrow, buyer's going to walk through, everything looks good. We're also looking to see that the seller is packing, right? That's the other thing, right? We want to make sure that this guy is looking like they're about to move because, I can't tell you how many times you go to the final verification and it looks like they haven't even packed a box. And then you realize, like, hey, this person doesn't have a place to go. So, for all those reasons, you never want to give up your ability to do the final verification. There is a form that you use for the final verification, and sometimes the buyer isn't able to make it. They'll ask us to go as the agent. We can go, but it's still considered that they waived their right to do the final verification if they themselves did not walk the property. Assignment request. So sometimes the buyer would, in some strange situations, assign his ability to purchase to someone else. What we see more often than anything else is a partial assignment, and that's when the buyer is adding on a buyer, right? So let's say the wife was going to buy it on her own, and then the husband says, actually, we need my income to qualify, and so they need to add the husband on in order for them to qualify. Or sometimes it's a situation where they didn't realize that they both need to be on the contract if they both want to be on title. So we're bringing on another buyer, and that would be considered a partial assignment. And we would use the AOAA, which is the assignment addendum, basically. And there's a box number 2 that speaks to adding on a new buyer. I saw Sue, you raised your hand. Sue, did you have your hand
Hi,
up about?
I'm right here, Talisa. I have a
Hi.
question. I had a closing not long ago in Roseville where the newer builder via the owner had to go back and do some repair to the house. And I was told by the agent, okay, it's going to be done. It's going to be done before close of escrow. The seller really doesn't want a credit. He really wants to get this done because it's under contract with Meritage, blah, blah, blah. We get there for the verification and they still haven't finished painting the ceiling and one other little thing that they had to do. But that was our verification. And we still had to close the next day and they were supposed to come that afternoon and do it. So the next day I get, congratulations, we're closed. And, oh, sorry, Meritage didn't get a chance to go there today to finish the painting and the other little thing that they had to do. But now it's on you. You need to call them and schedule a time for them to go in and finish the work. So, I mean, I don't like to have work done prior to close of escrow, especially if it's a short escrow. But is there anything, I mean, really it was up to myself or my buyer at that time to handle it. And they weren't happy about it, which just makes it look bad for me, you know, um, having been in it with them.
Yeah,
But
I think the reason that you do the final verification. Now listen, there's always going to be times where we get caught out, we tried our best and things didn't work out. But when you go do that final verification, and you see that the work hasn't been done, you'd want to put the brakes on. You'd want to threaten them with, hey, we're not going to close until this gets done. We're going to instruct escrow that we're not going to close. Sometimes that can't happen because the buyer needs to get in that property. Like everybody's pressed to get in that property. But then you want to get something in writing that says this is how it's going to happen. Or maybe you're going to do a quick, hey, now you're going to allocate some funds because it hasn't been done. We never got the ceiling painted. Now we want $1,000 because we're going to bring on our own painter. Too bad you thought Meritage was going to do it. You didn't do it. Either we're not going to close or you're going to give
yeah,
us a credit. So
well, we had it, it was the day before and everyone had already signed. So I didn't,
It's so even if they've signed, you guys, you can tell escrow not to record, but you do risk. So here's the thing. Two things
yeah,
happen. Once the buyer signs their loan docs, that next day the interest starts accruing. And so they are going to be paying that interest, but you can still say, hey, we're not going to record because the seller doesn't receive the money, right? And the seller, that's their big incentive. They want to get paid for their home that they're selling. So those are the things that you'd want to do when
okay,
you get there and you see they're not done, is to say escrow, whoa, whoa. And then, hopefully they are motivated to do some extra things that they wouldn't be motivated to do, like either give your buyer money or, paint the ceiling themselves or do something. And then, we can't fix everything all the time. Sometimes things just go wrong. Um,
right,
but the point of the inspection or the verification is to have a little bit of time to have some kind of remedy. Danielle?
Hi, I was just wondering about the assignment request. I mean, the way the contract was before, I don't recall it being like necessarily a part of it. So do we just leave this boilerplate? This has bothered me a couple of times. Do we just leave this like this boilerplate and let them say, they could possibly make a request for 17 days? Or do we want to see like a shorter period of time in there, or what is your thought about that?
My thought is, even if they make the request up to 17 days, it doesn't say that the seller's going to agree to it. So to me, it's kind of like
Okay.
a no harm, no foul. I mean, I'm sure there's that one situation out there where I could be proven wrong, but I wouldn't see it as enough of an issue to cause a disruption, in the
Okay.
situation. So
Okay.
yeah,
All right. Thanks.
okay. All right, we got like 2 minutes. Okay, so then I'm not going to get into contingencies. I'll save contingencies for next time, because contingencies are so exciting and fun to get into and to talk about. And, I know some of you are going to have some war stories and some horror stories to bring to our next session. But for the next 15 minutes, I'm happy to hang out and answer questions, or if anybody wants to add color to any of this stuff, or if you want to get on with your day, that's fine too. So I'm going to end us 2 minutes early, and then next week talk about contingencies. Dun 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 dun. The people from Roseville and Auburn know that I'm goofy, so sorry, people from Sierra Oaks, if you didn't know that. Now you're having to deal with the goofiness here. But other than that, I guess there's no questions, concerns, or anything. So let's just go have a nice Thursday. Stay warm. It's cold out there. It's gorgeous, but it's cold out there. I'll see you guys next week talking about contingencies. Bye.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye, Julie.
thanks, Talisa.
You're welcome. Bye.